Well, good evening. Thank you for coming to the Community Development Committee, February 16. I'd like to start by having everybody introduce yourselves and say who you represent.
I'm Dick Esslink. I represent the Ag Committee from St. Croix County.
Sean Anderson. I represent District 2, which is St. Joseph Township and Somerset Township.
Ryan Shirley, represent District 13 in the south half in Richmond.
Jerry Van Zomer, and I represent District 18, which is the Baldwin Village and the surrounding area.
I'm Scott Counter, represent District 11, which is mostly town of Star Prairie, a little bit of New Richmond, a little bit of Stanton, and the village of Star Prairie.
I'm Dan Hansen. I represent District 12, which is the northern part of New Richmond, and I'm lucky enough to chair this committee, and thanks for coming. Mr. Witt.
I'm Ken Witt. I provide audio video technical services, and I'm also the county administrator.
Go ahead. Ellen Denzer, Community Development Director.
Heather Amos, Corporation Counsel.
Julie Peterson, Community Development Department.
Very good. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes from Thursday, January 19? No, we'll let them stand as approved then. At this moment, I'd like to just say something about the agenda before we go into public comment. If you've looked at the agenda, you might notice that there was no mention of the Wildwood Trail, and I'd like to apologize. There was some miscommunication put out regarding the Wildwood Trail, and if it had caused you any concern, I really am sorry about that. The Wildwood Trail is safe. There has been no consideration of doing away with it in any way at all, and I'd like you to understand that. We don't have it on the agenda because there is no update concerning the ongoing work of improving the partnership and culture of working together between the county and the neighbors who live along the Wildwood Trail, the property owners, and that's why it's not on the agenda. So that's all I have to say about that. Moving on, I'd like to enter into the public comment era period of our meeting, and we're going to start with Laura Toomey.
And then just double checking that my husband Corey will follow.
Absolutely, and if you just say your name, your address, and then you have about 2 minutes to speak.
Sure. So my name is Laura Toomey. I live at 1467 24th Street in Holton. So my husband Corey and I are here to speak tonight about the property address change for tax parcel 030-2095-10-000. So we want to thank you in advance just for the opportunity to speak during this section tonight. So on January 9th, 2023, we received a letter from St. Croix County Community Development informing us that our property address of 1467 24th Street will be changing to 245 146th Avenue. The letter indicates that due to the discovery of an east-west portion of the street and the development of a cul-de-sac constructed to the east of our property, 2 addresses along this section of the street need to be changed. Since receiving the letter, we communicated with the following individuals in the Community Development Department: Doug Avalos, Brett Boudreau, and Ellen Denzer. Through our communication, we sought to understand more about this change and share our concerns. In addition, we contacted Daniel Hansen requesting to add this as an agenda item for tonight's Community Development Committee meeting. However, our request was denied. Outside of the Community Development Department and Committee, we also communicated with St. Joseph Town board members and neighboring city council members. They are in consensus. What necessitates this change to 2 addresses on our small dead-end street? As stakeholders, we are disappointed that the Community Development Department did not seek our feedback about this change. Please put yourself in our shoes and ask yourselves, how would you feel if this was being done to you and not with you?
Thank you. Corey Tumian.
Good evening. I want to thank everybody in advance for your time as well. We oppose the property address change due to the following concerns. While the Community Development Department indicated that the county emergency services will be notified of the address change, we're concerned that the change will cause delays in response times to our property during the initial period of change. The address change will cause us to incur significant financial costs, which is criminal in our opinion. Anticipated costs include replacing stonework. Our address is stoned into the front of our home, as well as our light pillar at the end of our driveway. We also have a custom mailbox, CNC cut in 4x4 steel that lights up at night with our physical address. That's also on the ground. Personal checks, driver's licenses. We ask who's paying these costs. We have yet to receive an answer from the Community Development Department on that. The address change will require us to notify hundreds of individuals and institutions, which put a substantial burden on our time. Not only this burden immediate, but it also has the potential to put a burden on our time for years from now. We don't know what we're going to encounter 10 years from now. Laura and I have professional careers and are raising a young family. We simply just don't have enough time as is. The solution we propose to you is to apply a grandfather clause to our property address. St. Croix County has authority to apply a clause as they have done in other instances in the past. For example, there are properties which include multiple driveways which the county has grandfathered in. In summary, we oppose this change and we're asking the St. Croix County Community Development to apply a grandfather clause for a property address. Thank you again for your time and listening to our concerns.
Thank you, sir. Tammy Erickson.
Not quite as organized as they. So I also live on that street. My husband and I are the other address. We've lived there for 26 years, built our house there, raised our family there, and we again oppose this change. I know of a particular incident that did happen when our road was closed, 24th Street and 23rd off of the freeway, when they widened it. A gentleman had a heart attack on the other side on 23rd Street. The ambulance did not know where to go. I think that's that. What if there's a fire they don't know how to get to? We've not been giving much information back when we've called and asked for this. As the other neighbors mentioned, we asked who would help with some of these cost increments. We have a trust, $600 to redo our trust just in and of itself. I know right now my father passed away. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to be done, and we're concerned about that. When we pass away and our children have to try to sell the property, none of us will be here. And so when this change is made and we're reassured by everybody that things will be fine when we go to sell, all of the permits for 1465 24th Street will no longer be to our property. Like I said, 26 years, and now with this new address, it's like a new home was just dropped in there. This is our forever home. We built it ourselves, and again, there's only 2 houses on that whole property. Talking about the county, many things are grandfathered in, and I feel 26 years is plenty of time to grandfather something in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Jason Erickson.
Good evening. So my name is Jason Erickson. I'm on 1465 24th Street with my wife Tammy. So in January we got our letter from Doug from the Community Development, and it states that 24th Street was discovered. meaning the previous 30 years, so the late 80s to early 90s when development went in, that we were undiscovered. So I find that a little bit hard to believe. There were two opportunities to make this right. One, when the development was put in, and two, when 24th Street and 23rd Street was disconnected from 3564 and had to route up to 150th. That was another opportunity to make these changes that didn't happen. The planning, timing, and execution of this whole project is almost laughable. If I performed at that level at my job, I wouldn't have a job, be immediately terminated. Everything from the callbacks to, in the letter, there's going to be a sign, to they've already contacted Amazon, FedEx, whatever. Like, we go to order something now and it won't allow us to put 24th Street in, yet there's no sign there. So the whole execution of this project has been ridiculous. It seems like there's complete disregard for the homeowner. In my job in customer service, how can I help you? As a community, I would assume it's how can we help you, the homeowners, the members of St. Croix County. It doesn't feel like any of that is happening whatsoever. As Corey stated, there's actual money involved. Here's my estate planning. When I pass away, this comes into play. This thing is riddled with 1465 24th Street. So to just simply state that, you don't have, it was, quote, you don't have much to change, no big deal. I have 53 line items. Some are single and some are joint that have to get fixed. Everything from your 401k to your doctor to American Family to Amazon to whatever, all has to get fixed with our new address. And as Corey talked about, in the word of the evening here is grandfathered. I myself went in to get a second driveway for my pole barn, and there were tears flowing with mascara running down their cheeks. Absolutely not. We can't have a second driveway. And I said, well, there's an old lady right there, kitty corner to the St. Joe Town Hall. She's got 3 driveways. She's grandfathered in. And so I'm asking for the same thing. Let's grandfather 24th Street. Leave it alone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for coming. I'd like to ask...
Is there any way that we could be an agenda item for the...
meeting? We were told we could.
I'm not...
That's what we're asking.
I understand that, and we're not going to respond to that. As I told you in the email, we don't have conversations during public comment. But thank you for coming. I appreciate you coming to present your case. Buck Malik?
May I speak during the agenda item about the Board of Adjustment, item number 1 on your agenda?
You may, and I will explain for your benefit. Buck is an invited speaker. I asked him to come. He does chair the board of the Zoning Board of Adjustment, which is an agenda item during this meeting. So, thank you for. I just wanted to draw a difference to that. Ed Schogner.
Hello, I'm Ed Schogner, 2210 50th Street, Somerset. I'm the Somerset Town Chairman. Came to my attention that the conditional use permits may be taken from the Board of Adjustments and put onto this committee, and I have problems with that. I think it's checks and balances. I think the committee that puts out the zoning and shouldn't be policing themselves. I think Board of Adjustments it's set up as a neutral committee to see both sides. So I think it's fair that we keep it that way. Also, I'm a little concerned if it is put back under this community development, the way the structure is now, that in the future, excuse me, now that the chairman of the county board appoints the supervisors to this committee, it could potentially be stacked that the cities would actually be controlling the towns on the conditional use permits. And it could happen, and I'm not saying it's going to, but it could. The towns take a lot of time in their comprehensive land use plans. We know what our towns want to look like. We spend a lot of time developing those plans, and I think it's up to the towns to keep it that way. I don't think somebody else should be stepping on us to say, to put businesses where we don't want them. So anyway, I just thought I'd give my 2 cents, so thank you.
Thank you for coming, Ed. All right, at this time, we're going to move into the first business item, which is consideration of the Board of Adjustment Authority process and procedure. Ellen, who's going to start with this?
There were two handouts provided. I provided the background information. I think it was the first one in your packet. This was taken, for the most part, right out of the Board of Adjustment rules and bylaws.
Could I say one thing? I'd like to include Buck in this conversation, so let's work him in as a third speaker, please.
Absolutely. And then there was a few things taken kind of directly out of statute, and then there were a few things taken out of the zoning, out of the training manual we use, out of the Center for Land Use Education, out of UW Stevens Point, and I forgot to put that in my list of sources. And then the little chart that it gives the amount of activity over the last 6 years is taken right from our records in our department. So it's a lot to go over, and I would defer to our Corp Counsel and our Board of Adjustment Chair and ask if there are any questions on what was in here, and then let them speak further.
Buck, would you mind coming up to the table so we can have you join the conversation? Does everybody know Mr. Mallett? Okay. And remember to use the microphone.
Oh, yeah, there's that. And Ryan and I go way back. We were in the same scout troop. Yeah, you could tell at that time that he was going to go far. He was a, I don't think I'll embarrass him, he was a quiet lad who kind of waited until all the instructions had been given, and then he was extremely competent. He remembered what he'd been told, and he did it. He was a joy to a scout leader. But that's not why you invited me here. I looked at, I downloaded the two pieces that that Ellen described and the one that Heather drew up, and although I was a county board supervisor for 19 years in total. I filled out somebody else's term, so that's why it came out to be an odd number, and I was the county board chairman for 6 years. And before that, I was on the planning commission of my town, the town of Hudson. The town of Hudson had departed from the county system as much as they could back in, I think, 1976. And we moved into our house in '79 and have been there ever since. So in the town of Hudson, we had our own zoning, as it were. And there are a few other examples around the county now. Some of you may live in those. So we had our own ordinance, we had our own planning commission and a board of appeals. So I had experience with that, and then I was on the committee that used to be called Planning and Zoning Committee. Now it's called Community Development. It's your committee here. I was on that for 4 years. I think it was from 2000 to 2004. And in 2005, I was appointed to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And in 2006, I became its chair. We elect our own chair, and officers. And and I've been the chair, despite my pleas for somebody else to take it over, but I've been the chair since '06. During that time, we've had some lawsuits in the land use management area. Feelings often run high, and sometimes there's a lot of money at stake. And some of our cases, no matter which way we may decide, there's going to be a lawsuit because somebody's going to, test it and see if they could get a different result from the circuit court or the appellate court or the state Supreme Court, or in one very famous case, the United States Supreme Court. So one of our cases went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And Heather was a big part of our winning that case at the United States Supreme Court. So I've seen a lot of stuff. I have some comments, and relative to whether this change should be made, I can put them in now, or I can respond to questions, or I can wait until other presentations have been made. Doesn't matter to me.
And I can speak a little bit about the memo that I wrote.
Let's let you go last with your comments, Buck, and we'll hear Corporation Counsel and Ellen, and then we'll listen to you last.
So I don't know if you had a chance to read my memo. It's fairly long, but it details the statutes and the case law that basically govern the Board of Adjustment. And as you may know, the Board of Adjustment, they address three things basically: variances, conditional use permits, and then decisions, basically appeals of the decisions of the zoning administrator. Right now that's Mike Wozniak. So if he made a decision, let's say, to deny a land use permit, a property owner or an aggrieved person could appeal that decision to the Board of Adjustment. So I set forth in my memo the fact that only boards of adjustment can address variances. They should be the body that decides appeals of decisions of the zoning administrator. Currently, they are the body that addresses conditional use permits. The county board, as a policy decision, could grant that decision-making to the zoning committee, or in our case, the community development committee. And there are pros and cons for having this body make decisions related to conditional use permits versus the Board of Adjustment. There are a lot of rules that the Board of Adjustment has to follow, such as not engaging in ex parte communication, which means you can't speak to the applicants before the public hearing, and that's just to ensure that there's no bias from the Board of Adjustment in making decisions before hearing all the evidence. It's basically it's called a quasi-judicial body, so basically making judicial determinations, but you're not a court of law, and that's why it's quasi-judicial versus just judicial. There is a concern about separation of powers. This body is the body that passes the ordinances, basically saying what's allowed in Chapter 15, the zoning code, and in the overlay districts. And the Board of Adjustment is the judicial body that determines whether or not there's exceptions to those rules. So I just laid out basically the laws, the statutes, regulations, but if anybody has specific questions about what the Board of Adjustment does versus this body, I can try to answer those, what some of the cons might be. If this body takes over the decision-making for conditional use permits, you'll need to have more than one meeting a month. You'll probably need 2 or possibly 3 meetings a month because those public hearings have to be held, and then the evidence needs to come in regarding the conditional use applications, and decisions need to be made. Sometimes I believe Board of Adjustment members even go out to the property to view it in person, which helps them get a visual of the property and the requests. So there are a lot more time. It will be more time consuming for this committee if they take over the authority for conditional use permits. I believe Ellen in her documentation did take some of the regulations right out of the rules that govern the Board of Adjustment, and just talks about remaining a neutral decision maker as a judicial body. If this board were to take over the decision making regarding conditional use permits, an aggrieved party could then appeal that to the Board of Adjustment. They would be the appellate decision maker, and then if an aggrieved person wasn't happy with that decision, they could then appeal that to the circuit court. So there would be another level of appeals, basically. Very specific decisions have to be written, they have to follow certain criteria on how you can approve or deny an application for a conditional use permit. So just some training would need to be provided just to detail how those decisions have to be made, what laws they have to be based on. It's one benefit of having Buck as the chair of the Board of Adjustment. As a lawyer, he understands kind of what those rules that need to be followed, making sure that there's publication is accurate, that there's a quorum, that the evidence comes in, all sides be heard. So those would be training opportunities that, you know, either myself or someone else would have to train this body to ensure that we're meeting all the criteria when addressing a conditional use permit application. So my job here is just to give you the facts and the law. I'm not going to say there's one way better or not. That's a policy decision for the board, but I can answer any questions that you may have about my memo, or if I don't know the answer, I will definitely research it and get back to you.
Ellen, do you have anything that you'd like to present?
Well, like I said, the process I've laid out is mostly right out of the Board of Adjustment rules and bylaws. So it's members, the terms, the rules, the meetings. You had asked about process, procedures, authority, so that's what I tried to cover. Conduct is in the bylaws, and it covers the things that Heather went over briefly just now, and it gives you definitions, you know, what is, you know, to a certain extent, I didn't try to give legal definitions, just took what was in there. But it talks about some of those things very specifically, tries to clear up that the board does not have authority to amend, repeal, or change the zoning ordinance in any way. All they do is function like a court. They give the full and fair hearing to both sides. They apply the rules, the zoning ordinance rules, and any other appropriate, legal standards to the facts of each case. And sometimes we have had to apply other legal standards. For instance, there are certain rules related to CAFOs, and you can't just limit it to what is presented, because there's an underlying rule in the state statute. So we had one Board of Adjustment hearing on a situation with that one. We actually brought out outside legal counsel to assist. Our corp counsel at that time felt it was most appropriate to bring in that outside counsel. So we did, and they assisted in explaining those rules, the basis that they had to start from. There are other things, for instance, solar, and also wind and that kind of thing. There's very specific rules in state law about how much even the Board of Adjustment can do. There are limits, and we always have to do our best to find that out, whatever it might be, and then provide that information to the Board of Adjustment, because it may go beyond what's in the rules and bylaws. Like this, in this case, those couple of things I put in here are from statute. Equal protection means that everyone in a similar circumstance has to be treated the same way, unless there's a reasonable basis for distinction. That kind of thing is very, very important. Due process, fair play, all that is a huge factor in how the Board of Adjustment handles conditional use permits, variances, and administrative appeals. One of the things we have every Board of Adjustment member do is attend at least once, and usually twice, a training class where they get this book, and they spend usually half a day or more, usually it's a full day, being trained on how to be a Board of Adjustment member and how to follow all the rules. If the conditional use permits were to come to this committee, then those members would need to go to that training also. And then I tried to lay out for you in that section that says Board of Adjustment application hearing process, trying to answer the question that was asked, how do we do it? What do we do? So everything is laid out in the ordinances, when it has to go to Board of Adjustment, when it does not, what application materials have to be submitted. Some of them are a little bit general, and then we have to say, okay, this is what we need to meet it. Some of them can be waived by the zoning administrator because they perhaps are like a traffic impact analysis. We don't require that in every situation. We require it in some situations. But it says it should be required, generally speaking, when such and such situation occurs. Those are examples of things that are right in the ordinance. We have to get those public hearing notices out, just like we do for the rezonings for this committee, but we have, you know, these two committees that are meet a week apart, so we're always juggling and making sure it's definitely not, oh, that's just automatic, it just happens. No, everything has to be written properly, have to have the right notice go out. As it says in here, we send out notice, 300, you know, people up to 300 feet around the subject property, same as we do with rezonings, but there's more often conditional use permits and variances and things than we have rezonings. And then how the meetings are even more formal than these county board committee meetings, and are even more formal than your county board meetings. If you can understand that, encourage you to come and watch a Board of Adjustment meeting at some point. Chair Malik will give instructions to the audience prior to any start of the hearing, usually explaining how things are going to go and what's going to happen and how he's going to handle. And that's all spelled out in the rules and bylaws. Order of operations, all that kind of stuff. The bylaws are like 18, 10, 20 pages long. I didn't want to put all that in here, of course. And they're available on our county webpage, so you guys can read them at any time. But you know, it's all spelled out. It's all pretty dictated exactly how we do it to keep it very, very formal. And so that's the highlights from this material. I did put together to show you the volume of the work we do. Obviously, in 2020 was a little slow year. We've had other slow years. And others that have been very heavy. You know, 24 in 2019 was a crazy year, so, as an example. So, and to show you how many have been denied. I will say that the 2 CUPs, conditional use permits, that were denied, I don't recall the 2016 one offhand, but the most recent ones, they are related to when people come in and want a variance. They're related to when they want a variance. If the variances are denied, then they don't need the conditional use permit, so it's denied as a matter of automatically, or kind of automatically. They have to make a decision on each and every item individually, usually. So that one this past year in 2022 and the one in 2019, and I'm pretty sure probably the one in 2016 was related to the 4 variances that were requested that year too. So that's how those end up being denied. Otherwise, for the most part, conditional use permits are generally approved. It's just a question of what the conditions will be, and the applicant proposes things, and then they're brought up. The Board of Adjustment suggests items, and they're discussed, and then decisions are made by the board. So if that, questions on that? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how you're going to frame this up. Apparently, you would have 3 choices. Do nothing about this agenda item, make a motion recommending something to the county board for a change, or make a motion to, or a recommendation to the county board not to make a change. It's up to you. I entered this with without a preconception, although I go way back earlier than 2000. I don't believe that this process, this allocation of duties, has ever been examined since sometime in the 90s. And it seems to me that it's perfectly appropriate in government to re-examine things and ask yourself, why do we do it that way? Is it time for a change? And so I was happy that the opportunity to take another look was present, and whoever initiated it, I think, ought to be commended for getting the ball rolling. But I've come to the conclusion that there would be some serious drawbacks, and let me just highlight them to you. They basically fall into 3 categories, so you know you can get a sense of where I'm going here and how long it might take. I'll make it as short as I can. In my opinion, county government is mostly about customer service. We're trying to provide, and Ed referred to it, we're trying to provide what people want to have, what they need to have, at the lowest responsible price and in an efficient and equitable manner. And I think the first drawback comes in that customer service area. If we shift the CUP, the conditional use permit authority, to this committee, I think the first problem will be when we have applicants who need both a variance and a conditional use permit. We don't have a choice about who decides on variances, as Heather said. That's got to be the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Okay, we don't meet at the same date and time. Now, maybe we should shift it and should meet the same night or whatever that you do, and hold your hearing, then hold our hearing. But I think it could very quickly get out of sync, so that you decide to table a conditional use permit application because you need more information about something. So it's going to come back at your next meeting. And meanwhile, we, on our schedule at the Board of Adjustment, are dealing with a variance. And we approve it that night, that morning. We have our meetings in the daytime for the convenience of most of our applicants. So immediately we're out of sync. If we have put some conditions on the variance and they aren't the same as you end up putting your conditions on the conditional use permit, then I guess we're each going to have another meeting while we try to rationalize them. I see that as the potential for an immense problem for our applicants. Why should they have to do it twice? And I haven't done a count or asked anybody to do a count, but my guess is that probably a third of our matters involve both a variance and a conditional use permit. So it's not insignificant. I don't know what we do about fees, because I'm not fully conversant on the fees. They're $1,100, and I don't remember, do we charge one fee when there's a variance and a conditional use permit in the same application, or do we charge two? And now that question, we don't need an instant answer, but you'll have to face that question. Are you going to do two publications, one for conditional use permit and then the Board of Adjustment is doing one for the variance? That costs the county money to publish, you know. And so are we going to recover that or eat that fee as a county? It's worth talking about. Ed alluded to the one other customer service issue that I think I see. The balance between county government and town government is a sensitive one. As I mentioned, I came to this county in the town of Hudson after we had withdrawn from county zoning as far as we could, and we were doing our own zoning in the town of Hudson. I think the people who got there before me and made that decision wanted to grow at a faster rate than the rest of the county. They wanted to control their destiny in that respect, and so they did it. But I was sensitized from the beginning between the tension between county government and town government. The towns only have advisory authority when they are under county zoning. If Ed's town doesn't want a particular thing and they send a letter up to the Board of Adjustment, it's still the Board of Adjustment's decision whether to do it the same way as the town or not. And we cannot delegate that. It's embedded in state law that the county can't simply do what the town asks for, much as they want to. The case must be built on its merits, not delegated to the town. But it's nevertheless a sensitive balance. And so if this committee was dealing with CUPs, you'd need to be mindful of that. You need to manage that. You who are from cities would have to be very sensitive to not allowing the perception to arise that cities were telling towns how they could grow. That would just make for frictions that nobody would want. So that's the customer service aspect of it. I think lawsuit expense would go up. In land use management, you can't avoid all lawsuits. There are some situations where there's just too much at stake. And the people, I mentioned this earlier, I'm not going to repeat it. But we carry around, we with the Board of Adjustment have this orange placard thing to take with us out and put it in our windshields and show it to the people we meet when we go to a property. And it tells them We are not going to engage in conversation with you, because that would be an ex parte conversation, unless all the neighbors and everybody who might be opposed to the application are there to hear it. It's an ex parte conversation, and we can't do that. Because it would not, then we might be biased. We might come into the hearing already having essentially made up our minds. And that's no good in a quasi-judicial context. So we have to shut them off. And when I get a phone call, and it's regarding anything about land, I get a call and on my cell phone, you know, if it has to do with land, I interrupt them right away and I say, if this has anything to do with zoning and St. Croix County, I need to stop you, because if you continue talking to me, I may unintentionally acquire information that I cannot forget. You know, it's like seeing a murder or something. Once you've seen it, you can't forget it. And that means I've got to recuse myself. So now the board is down to one less person, you know, to make that decision. If you take on CUPs, you're going to have to figure out some way, each of you personally are going to have to figure out some way how you sort the incoming phone call or the incoming conversation at the grocery store. For me, on the Board of Adjustment, I know that anything having to do with land use management is verboten. I just tell them, sorry, I can't do that. And I say it in the most tactful way I can. They still sometimes feel angry that I'm not, you know. And with you, it'd be much tougher, because the other hat you wear, the hat you wear for most of your work, is legislative. You're in charge of making changes to the ordinance, making rezoning decisions. You could decide when you were elected, you could put in your campaign materials, I will always approve every rezoning that comes to me. It'd be weird, and it would undermine your credibility, but it wouldn't be illegal. You know, to have a bias going into something because you're serving a constituent who wants something is what you do often. Your duty is to represent your constituents in some sense of the term. You have a broader responsibility to the whole county, but you have a responsibility to your district to advocate for it. That's unfortunately completely off the table for the Board of Adjustment and for CUPs. If we proceed in the direction of moving CUPs to the Community Development Committee, we'll have less work for the Board of Adjustment. Yay, that's swell, because of course those darn files, you know, we have a lot of homework. It's not unusual to have 100 pages pertaining to a particular file. And it's no pickle. It's one of the reasons it can be hard to recruit and retain members on the Board of Adjustment is that homework. And the other hard thing about it is the tension in the room many times. You know, we have people all coming in and all wanting to speak. We set up the room with ourselves back there, and the first row of chairs about here, and we use that speaking platform there. Over the years, we've evolved that as really the best way. If we're too close to the people, their excitement and emotion make it hard for us to be even-tempered. You know, may get the best of us. And so we want some space. But if you watch one of the tapes ever, you'll see that as chair, I generally spend a lot of time trying to make the audience and the people who might comment as comfortable as I can get them to be without them hovering over us and breathing down our throats. Because we do want to hear from them. We do not want to intimidate people to not speak. So I try to make them comfortable. And but there's a very fine line. You also may not be joking around. And those of you who've seen me know I have a tendency to want to do that. I've gotten in trouble over the years. I remember actually the case that went to the Supreme Court, I guess there was some it was near the end of a long day, and one of the board members said something about, we'll be able to adjourn soon and go out and have a beer, and the junior person on the board buys the beer, right? Well, you know how that showed up in the transcript. These guys were not paying any attention to our case, they were concentrating on getting their beer. Well, of course that wasn't true, but it looks bad. So if you take that on, you're asking for a hard job. You'll have to spend a lot of time changing the ordinances. Was there a list of the ordinances that would have to be changed? It's not just the Board of Adjustment rules. You know, there's just the 5 of us and our 2 alternates making those changes to the rules. We could probably do that pretty well. We don't need a hearing for it, but when you change an ordinance, you've got to have public hearing on it. If you go down that route, you'll get to hear me again, because of course there'll be a public hearing on it. And my very last point, and please hold your applause. I know you're glad to see me come to the end. I'm glad to come to the end too. That point is this. We have a sort of an efficiency that comes about this way. When we have variances and conditional use permits, anytime we have more than one on the same day, the people who come up on the agenda second, third, fourth, fifth, anybody after first place gets to see how it went the first time. You tracking with me? They understand. We have these certain rules. You gotta have signed over there, because we're not gonna administer an oath to you. You sign it over there, and that's your oath. We're gonna first have the staff presentation and some dialogue with the board. Then we're gonna have the people who wanna speak for the applicant and their surveyor and their engineers and whoever else there might be for that application. After they and dialogue with the board, then we will have those who are opposed. Okay, and lastly, anybody who isn't necessarily for or against, but has some comment or some question they think will help the board to make a better decision. So after it's been done once, we don't have to say it again for the next people, and their comfort level is raised. So the fewer cases we have, the less opportunity we will have that to happen, is all my point is. There's a kind of efficiency that's built into having some number of cases so that we have more than one every month. Okay, not a big deal, but there it is. And I am done, subject to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to the committee members. I'm sure you have questions, comments. Who wants to go first? Dick.
Speaking as a town chair, I totally agree with Ed and everything that you said, Buck. I may not have always been on your side in years past. Welcome. I'm on your side now. I think that a change would probably create a lot of trouble. And the thing that sticks out in my mind the most would be you are trying to create the ordinances, not try and figure out how to bend them. That's their job. Because if you were asked to bend the ordinances, you're not doing your job. You're not following through. Let them do the bending. And I can't see how you could sit as a committee and bend those ordinances that you're trying to make everybody follow. I just think that there's nothing wrong. Why fix it? Or why try to fix it? That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Who's up? Jerry.
My question is, why does this come up now? I mean, is there a need for a change? Would the change benefit the county? Who would this change benefit? It's kind of straightforward and it's kind of not straightforward. But, you know, what would be the advantage, I guess, is the first question I would have.
I've been wondering, who wants to take a stab at that? Do we have an answer?
This is a shot. We made a decision to turn down the manure to gas and agricultural products, and that was a CUP, at least in part. I don't remember the details. I voted for it, but I was, you know, in the minority. It's possible that, although the same application was made in the village of Roberts, I understand, and was turned down there, and I didn't follow it closely, so I don't know whether it was the same or different. That's the only criticism I'm aware of a CUP that's generated publicity in the years since 2005, but there may be others.
I think Buck had said earlier that he applauded the person that brought it up because it's good to look at our organizational structure from time to time. So no problem with that. It's really purely a policy decision. Heather, I missed her presentation, but I know she laid out what the options were for you. We're here to educate. We're not here to tell you which way to do it. That is entirely up to the county board of how they want to organize. We've provided you with the different options that are available to you. So it's a policy decision at this point.
I guess with everybody still mulling over what they want to say, I'll go ahead and add to what Jerry said. I started out my process going to people who I know in the townships, because I know that you have to be living in a township to be on the board to serve with Buck. And I thought that I would turn to people who I know and respect, like Ed Schochner and like Gary Knudsen and like Bill Peavy, and ask their opinions. And the opinion that I got was exactly what Dick said. Why try to fix something that's not broken? And we appreciate the process the way it is, and please leave it alone. And who's doing this? And I said, I don't know. And so I've kind of asked that question, where's this coming from? And I've gotten pretty much the same answer. It's a process. It needs to be reviewed. We're just putting it forward for if you want to change the policy. So I don't know why we're reviewing it. But we're reviewing it, and like Buck said, it's a good thing to take a look at our policies every once in a while and decide if it's a good policy. And what I'm hearing, it's a darn good policy. So I think we should applaud the work that Mr. Malik is doing and the board, and pat them on the shoulder and say thank you, because I don't know that I want to be here 3 nights a month for 3 hours or 4 hours a meeting, taking field trips to see how various properties stack up, and that's my opinion. So who wants to go next? Ryan.
I guess I'll go next. I was the one that made the request to have this on the agenda item, only because I had looked through the state statute, and I think there's, without getting into huge details, there's some gaps between what our county rules and regulations are versus the state statute. And I wanted to make sure that we were following those the right way. I think that, well, there isn't, I don't think, a county out there that doesn't have a Board of Adjustment, but according to state statute, the Board of Adjustment may be created. It's not required to be created. So I wanted to figure out how, first of all, how that was, is where I kind of started this whole thing. And then looking at it as more of a appeal board was my my thought on Board of Adjustment. And I know the administration appeals side, we don't see a lot of those. But on the variances and the CUPs is more of your, what you see at BOA. But in my, I'd have to do a little bit more research on it, but in my, the way that I read it, the Board of Adjustment is supposed to be there as an appellate board so that they don't have to take it directly into the court system. My thoughts was that someone on staff should be making a recommendation, and if the parties don't agree with it, then it goes to Board of Adjustment, is my first glance when I looked at that state statute. Whether Heather agrees with me or not, I don't know, but that's kind of where we started this discussion.
And are you referring to just conditional use permits or variances? Just CUPs?
I think both variances and CUPs, you know, as you look at state statute, you know, Board of Adjustment is supposed to be an appellate, but if nobody makes the first decision, is Board of Adjustment supposed to be the first determining factor?
I think a variance is actually a decision, it's an interpretation of the code made by staff, and then a variance is different from what that allows.
Right, and the variances are only supposed to be granted in very specific situations. If there's a hardship that's not self-created. The rules and the laws are very specific regarding variances, but statute and case law do indicate that variances can only be decided by the Board of Adjustment. So I do not believe that county staff could make decisions regarding variances. As far as CUPs, I did not research very detailed as to whether zoning staff can make decisions regarding CUPs.
It was on the slide.
It is on this slide. It shows that the question, it would be page 7 of my memo, local government structure, and it indicates, conditional use permits, question mark, by county board, by the Planning and Zoning Commission, or by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So those are the 3 kind of question mark areas of who should make the decisions regarding conditional use permits. But I did not research specifically whether zoning staff can make decisions regarding conditional use permits. I think they would have some concerns about that. They administer the zoning code, and if they're making exceptions to it, there might be some concerns there about the staff making that. And I did not research that specific issue. I was mostly researching whether that should be this committee or the Board of Adjustment making decisions regarding conditional use permits.
And they're setting the conditions. That's a lot to ask a staff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they follow the code, and the code, if there's land use permits, those, I think the zoning administrator is very comfortable saying, yes, land use permit, it's approved or denied. If it's denied, it gets appealed to the Board of Adjustment. But as far as setting conditions on a conditional use permit, I think it's more comfortable, and there's better checks and balances if there's a committee, either this committee or the Board of Adjustment doing that. I don't know if Buck wants to say anything else about that, but the conditions that the Board of Adjustment sets, they're very specific to, there has to be evidence as to why those conditions would help, the purpose and the meaning and the intent of the code.
Yeah, I think there sometimes is a misunderstanding that that the decision on a conditional use permit or on a variance, or even an appeal, an administrative appeal, that no reason needs to be given. And that's true when you make your legislative decisions. You don't have to articulate a coherent set of reasons, but we must. In those 3 contexts, whether it's for or against, there must be reasons given. And frankly, one of the harder things is getting agreement on the reasons. I mean, if you have a 5-member board, and 3 of them vote yes, but when they go to give the reasons, they come up with 3 different reasons. That's not going to wash. When that one goes to court, that's going right back. So sometimes we have a fair amount of debate that goes into agreeing on the reasons, in which, we have to convince each other. It's because varying from the road setback is going to be dangerous because there are trucks going by at 60 miles an hour. You know, articulating the specific reasons and agreeing on them is an important part of the work, which, you know, you can do that too, but it does take a while. And if you if you change members every 2 years, you got to start over, getting used to each other and working together.
It does say in the statutes that the applicant should suggest conditions or develop them. And that is, but they also can be imposed by the Board of Adjustment. So if you were, I could bring in one of our longer staff reports or provide someone a longer staff report to show you that most of the conditions that we put in as recommendation to our board are things that we've talked it over with the applicant, and they know they needed to do some kind of erosion control, or they know that the ordinance requires landscaping, or they know that the ordinance requires things, and now they've said, well, I'm going to plant these kind of trees and these kind of shrubs this far apart, and that's then the condition that we put in, the recommended. We put in most of it what's been worked out between the staff and the applicant, in terms of, this is what the ordinance requires, so how are you going to meet it? You told us, we said, that probably won't cut it, or, gee, the board might beef that up if you don't. Well, then I'll beef it up. How many more trees do I need to plant? I mean, we've had that question literally. How many more trees do I need to plant? So they'll say yes. Okay, here's what we recommend. And then that gets in as a recommendation. So there may be some misunderstanding that we're writing conditions. Sometimes we do ones that very rarely that the applicant doesn't know about ahead of time. We talk to them about it all the time and have lots of meetings. But occasionally there will be that, especially if we're going to recommend denial. And a lot of times we tell them, this isn't looking good, but we don't recommend denial on conditional use permits for the most part, because it's all about, can they meet the conditions, and that's not our decision to make at all. So we aren't doing that. In fact, even the one that Buck mentioned that he voted yes on that was failed, staff recommended approval with a whole series of conditions we talked about with the applicant beforehand. And sometimes the Board of Adjustment will want something and they'll say, we're going to recess. Staff, go meet with the applicant and talk to them about how this could possibly be worded, because we want a condition generally saying something like this. And we want to know how you could word it to make sure it's enforceable. That's always what comes back, because then whatever the decision is, we have to somehow follow up and make sure it all happens. So if it's something we can't possibly do, then we usually try to say it. We don't know how we'll do that. But they don't have that kind of discussion at all ever at the board meeting. It's always like a recess or something. It's very, again, or they'll recess literally, and then have us come back and work something out. I don't know if that helps.
Of course, we're subject to open meeting law, so we're not going to be talking with the applicant, a majority of us, other than with the microphones on and all of that, or we're really setting ourselves up for a losing lawsuit. To the extent that Supervisor Shirley is suggesting delegating a little more authority to the staff, maybe it could be done. I guess I share Heather's skepticism about that it would stand up when tested in court. But I'm cheap, and I don't like to hire more staff than we absolutely need. And we've got a duty to the taxpayers here, and I don't know how I could justify hiring more staff to handle more work, or the alternative, asking the staff to do more with less. Those are the two sides of it. We've got a customer service issue here. I think it's really important in the business of building structures and starting businesses and putting in duplexes and things like that. Time is important to these applicants, and they need prompt decisions, and you're sensitive to it, whenever you do a subdivision or whatever, you see that, how it impacts them, the time of year, is it the construction season already, you know? And, and we're sensitive to that too. That's part of why we're there. So I mean, maybe you can do it, Mr. Shirley, but at the face of it, I'm a little skeptical that it could be done and done for the same cost.
And just go, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Just from what you had said before, where you can't talk to any of those people beforehand until their public hearing. Wouldn't that kind of be the same thing? If they're coming in and talking to the staff and the staff is going to be making that decision, that's a no-no, isn't it?
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you make a good point. Ex-parte communication doesn't become any better if you're looking forward to the potential for a legal challenge. Yeah, I suppose. But what a mess that would be. You know, you got to get the applicant and all the neighbors gathered around in order to have a conversation. You might as well hold the public hearing. But
I move that we table this to a date uncertain. I don't think we need to continue having this discussion. I'm fine leaving it the way it is. And I don't, if we're going to change it, there's no need to make a recommendation, a resolution of the county board. Let's just table it to date uncertain and let it be at that.
Is there a second? We have a second?
I'll second. I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll take it to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. The motion passes unanimously. This will be tabled to a date uncertain. And thank you very much. Buck, I'd like to thank you for coming. And I'd like to...
it hasn't a thing to do with me. I mean, just as in all land use decisions, we're talking about a piece of land, we're talking about decisions that are perpetual until changed. We're talking about a situation where the applicants who are before us today may be run over by the beer truck tomorrow, and it's their ugly son-in-law who is running that business or whatever, you know. So it's not dependent on the people.
And this has been an excellent exercise. Would you like to say one more thing? Let's go ahead and have one more.
Could I ask Buck a question? Buck, is there any way that this committee could assist you, could make things go smoother, or would you like us just to put our hands in our pocket and nod when they go by?
My goodness. What an open-ended offer. I don't think so. I mean, you know, every once in a while, we'll send you, if we see a pattern of things that are happening, applications that are coming to us time after time, and we're always granting them, we may send you a note by virtue of a motion that says, consider just changing the zoning ordinance on this. I think we did that with pole barns. We were getting a lot of applications for pole barns, and we were always approving them, and ultimately the next time you did the zoning revision, I think you framed up some sizes and maximum height, and then you handed it off to the staff. If we see something like that, we'll send it, but it won't be frequent. We just work within the ordinance as it is.
It's pretty good, Buck. We framed up the pole barn.
As a Freudian slip,
Okay.
without sexual overtones.
Oh, goodness. That would be plenty from you. All right, we're going to move on with that to the next order of business, which is resolution to support St. Croix County resource management to apply for a TRM grant, which is Ellen and Tim, which is Tim.
Jim, if you want to just go over very briefly, and Julie, if you would slide down to that part.
Okay. We have a resolution that's required to submit a proposal to the DNR for funding. It's a requirement of our county, but it's also a requirement of the funder that they see that the county has approved of the application. This particular application is similar to one that I brought to the board 2.5 years ago to do work in the Willow River watershed. This proposal would be very similar. It would provide funds for cost share to be put on the ground, as well as about 2 years of funding for a staff person, an LTE position, and anticipated that this would be the existing LTE that we have now would just continue that position on for 2 more years starting in 2024. And basically that's kind of the outline of it.
I would add that there is no county out-of-pocket or levy match. It would all be in-kind match of $55,300, which would come from our supervisory costs, our office space, computers, vehicle, that kind of thing.
All right, so do we have a motion? Or a question? Jerry, you look like you have a question.
I'm just trying to find it on my screen.
Here. Hand this to Jerry. He wants to read it before he votes on it. We're going to take 1 second.
Julie, or can you scroll?
Just to clarify then, this is just a request to turn in a grant for the money that we count.
That's right, and the match is in-kind only.
Right.
For our supervision and our office space, and it allows us to offer help to our farmers for land and water resource management. It's a win-win-win. Sean?
I guess I do have a question, and was the other grant is, I suppose, expiring at when the year before this one starts?
Correct. It would ideally would end at the end of this year. I anticipate I may have to extend it, but the two could run concurrent for a short period of time. Yeah.
All right, Sean?
I'll make a motion to approve the grant application.
Excellent. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have movement and a second, and do we have any conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Same sign. It's a unanimous vote.
Thank you.
And I'm going to take an opportunity here to thank you, Tim, for your good work. I've taken the opportunity a couple of times to stop out in Baldwin to visit Tim in his office, and I'm always deeply impressed. If you ever have a chance to stop, probably give a call and say, hey, Tim, I'd like to come and say hello. It's just incredible work out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have update to the Highway 35 Off-Road Trail Project and TAP Grant. That's going to be John and Brett.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. We're just going to provide you a brief project update relating to the Highway 35 off-road trail. And just a little bit of background for the new members. This project is a trail project that runs from the village of North Hudson, eventually up to Holton, and would connect with the St. Croix Loop Trail. So in 2020, the county applied for the first of 3 phases for this trail project. And the phase 1 would be the color you see here, kind of in the orange shade. I'm kind of using the cursor for that. It's a 1.11 mile trail that starts at Summer Street in the village of North Hudson and goes up to Old County Road 35 at the entrance of Eckert Blufflands Park. And so this project is using what they call TAP funding, or Transportation Alternative Program funding. And that is a federal program that's administered by the State Department of Transportation. And it's federal funds that are used on an 80% federal, 20% county match. And so what we want to do today is just run through what happened over the last couple of years. So in 2021, the county entered into a funding agreement with DOT on the project. And that 1.1 mile section of trail back in 2021 was estimated to be $468,134. And then what we did is we just marked here the $374,000 was the 80% federal match, and then the $93,000 was the county match. And of course, as committee members know, as we've gone through the last year or two, due to the rate of inflation, supply chain issues, labor issues, the estimated project costs for this has risen. In January, we received a revised estimate from our engineer of the project, and the project cost went from $468,000 to an estimated $679,000. That amount includes a $10,000 state plan review fee, and then a contingency for the project of 15%. So in total, based on the new estimate, this is a difference of about $211,000 from the original construction estimate. Once we learned of this, staff immediately requested additional funding from DOT, but was denied because of the parameters of the federal funding that was distributed. This was also a competitive grant process, so there were other projects that DOT was locked into, so there was no flexibility for increased funding on their side. So at that point, St. Croix County would be responsible for any increase in the construction cost. And what we did as part of the new estimate, we actually did a cost reduction measure